Hey everybody, this is Professor Diaz-Kozlowski, and this mini lecture is going to focus on why we should study sex and gender systems in education, and it's a part of Unit 5, which focuses on healthcare, reproductive justice, and sex and gender systems in education overall. And so I know you've already read the Sean Lee piece and the Kathy Ferguson piece, which is our healthcare and reproductive justice components of this unit. This particular mini lecture is really a primer to help you understand a little more deeply why you're going to read about Barry Thorne, Lorena Garcia, the Toomey piece, Cindy Cruz, the Sokolowar piece, and the Krasinski piece, because not every WGS course is the same, and so I want to make sure it's clear for you why I'm positioning sex and gender systems and educational institutions in our last unit. So I'm going to go over a few things, and these are your learning outcomes for this particular lecture, is that I want you to think about why education is so important in the United States. Why is that? Why we're studying it, why it's part of this unit. And then I'm going to let you know why we should study sex and gender systems in education. Going to focus a little bit on Title IX, not just what it is, but what it does, particularly in the context of this course, because I think that's really important. And if you're going to take this course, you need to be able to, again, apply this information to your life, to your workplace, wherever you go next. And I think too many people leave college and they have no idea what the heck Title IX is or what it does and why it's there. And so we're going to talk about that. And then the role of language again. This should be a repeated theme. You should be able to hopefully talk about this for the rest of your life. Why language is a site of struggle and how language, particularly when we're talking about it in the context of education, is so critical in ending sexism. So, one of the reasons why we study sex and gender systems in education is because there is this ongoing relationship between schools and society. So, I have this really cool pastel Venn diagram over here for you to help you think about these two circles as interconnected and always ongoing with one another. And remember, when I'm talking about society, I'm referring to, on the macro level, it refers to a group of people who share a culture, a government, land, institutions, and societal relationships. And so education is one of the fundamental institutions in this country, right? Because there's this ongoing relationship between the democratic values that we have as a country and then also how we're going to do that in schools. So interestingly, schools are always trying to reinforce these common values, right, of the past, as well as implement social change simultaneously. And so there's this tension, right? And often people are taught when you're growing up, hey, if you work really hard and study, the myth of meritocracy, right? Like you're going to be fine, you'll do really well. And so there's this notion that education is a vehicle for social change and to change your status in this world. But we know that that's not exactly true. So there are these things, right, that are going on in education that really make a difference in our educational experience. But overall, on a broad spectrum, schools are really important because they try to reinforce what do we know as common values, right? Um, and the public schools in this country also serve three really important needs of our society. And those needs are always interconnected. Our political needs, our economic needs, and our social needs. And I would argue probably in my lifetime, I've really seen a swing of the economic needs of our society sort of supersede these other political and social needs, and there's a really an imbalance between the political, economic, and social, and that's why many students, who I find in my classrooms, they come to the classroom and they see college as job training, as a place where they're going to learn specific things and then go off and have a career and make money. And that's not what college is about. College is about developing yourself as a human being and asking large questions. Questions like, who am I? What do I believe in and why? How am I going to learn about people that are not like me? How am I going to learn about myself and how I got to be here in this moment? And what are the things that have impacted me? And particularly WGS 120 is a general education course. So it's general education. It's generally giving you information about a subject you don't know a lot about. You may be very excited about gender, sex, and power and feel like these issues are very pertinent to our world in this moment. But gender, sex, and power has always been important in our world. Uh, and so it's important for you to recognize the way that we talk about education is really important. And these are the three big reasons why we study sex and gender systems in education is because schools and society have a relationship. And we want to continually study this relationship as it evolves because it's not static. So the relationship that schools and society had when I was in college is very different than it is today as the relationship that it has as you are in college. And so these things continually evolve. So you have to recognize that there's this socio-political historical relationship between schools and society. And as a society, we have to decide what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And education is one of the most important institutions where we decide what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And so in this class per se, we're studying sex and gender systems very specifically for three big reasons. Number one, again, is that how we understand the concept of sex and the concept of gender, but also sex and gender as a system has changed over time. And because it's changed over time, it continues to impact that relationship between schools and society. So again, how we understand sex and gender, that's not static. It's going to continually evolve. So it's not just something that emerged right now in your lifetime. It's been a part of our world. It's been a part of our educational system. But because it impacts the relationship between schools and society, sometimes when you enter into the conversation at a particular age, it can feel like it's very new to you, but it's actually been around for a really long time. So you have to understand that how we understand sex and gender as a system has a history, and it's cultural, and it's impacted by society and politics. And that itself, sex and gender as a system, continually impacts schools and society. The second reason is that gender, as you learned from Lorber and Shaw and Lee in Unit 1, organizes educational institutions because gender organizes our lives. And so gender impacts all student experiences. And that's across interpersonal, institutional, and instructional, right? And then the third is that we know sexism is embedded in educational institutions. And we know that because Title IX exists to mitigate sexism within schools, period. And we also know that this gender binary is deeply rooted in school climates, and it contributes to shape rape culture and gender violence in schools. So this will come up again as you read in particular the Garcia piece and the Toomey piece. The Toomey piece is really going to focus on school climate and the way that heteronormativity operates and heteronormativity regulates. It's regulated on the social policy level. Right? And so that's really going to come up as you continually read the readings after this point. So these are the three reasons that I've included these readings in this unit in our class is because sex and gender systems impact schools and society, gender organizes educational institutions, and it impacts all student experiences on these multiple levels, and that sexism is embedded in educational institutions. And so we want to try to dismantle sexism using feminism, but particularly Title IX is something that was created in 1972 to mitigate the fact that we know sexism is embedded in educational institutions. So just in case you needed a reminder, again, sexism, it's that ideology that supports patriarchal relationships. And it says, okay, patriarchy is normal and okay, and sexism justifies that. And again, we know that sexism is operating all the time on these multiple levels. So we study sex and gender systems because we want to dismantle this, because we know that sexism is embedded in our educational institutions. So Title IX, what is it? It's very important for you to understand what Title IX is. It's a part of the Educational Amendment Act of 1972, and it's a federal law, right? It says that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So I have a little infograph here that's important. It simplifies sort of, that's the jargon of the actual amendment. But what it does is it says, it focuses, in schools, and it says you can't discriminate and limit by sex and sexual harassment in public schools or other government-funded institutions. So what does that mean? Like, who cares, right? This is really important because before 1972, this protection didn't exist. So it's not arbitrary that before 1972, did you know that women were not allowed to attend Dartmouth College? So think about that. Not being allowed, you couldn't attend Dartmouth College if you were a woman because they said women are inferior. And there was nothing that anyone said that could make that institution of education change their mind until Title IX. Because Dartmouth does, even though it's a private university, it receives some federal monies. And so it made that change. So between when it was founded in the 1800s until 1972, women were excluded as a group. Think about how long women were excluded just from that one university, right? So that's one small example that schools are prohibited from restricting admission or participation in activities based on sex, right? Now, a lot of people refer to Title IX in terms of sports, but it also has an impact based on your admission or participation in all activities, not just in sports, right? So again, that's why at the beginning of this class, and if you look on your syllabus and you look at the first, so Start Here, Unit 1, part of our ReggieNet course, there's a little sheet that says Title IX, and it has all the information of ISU on there, because I wanted to make sure that you understood that as a person on this campus, you have rights. And so if someone is discriminating against you based on your sex and based on your gender, is stalking you or sexually harassing you, there is a mechanism for you to report that and for that behavior to end. And so that's really important that you understand that without Title IX, all of that information and many of the courses like this one would simply not exist. Now I have this slide up here because I really like it because it shows, again, as I've mentioned throughout this class, that just because we're talking about sex and sexism doesn't mean that we're not talking about racism. It doesn't mean that we're not talking about nativism. It doesn't mean that we're not talking about heterosexism. So this slide is to show you, and I really like how Tufts University lays this out on their website, so I borrowed it from them, the way that Title IX is working in conjunction with the Clery Act, the Violence Against Women Act, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And so I want to highlight here, because this is an online class, I didn't get to show you this documentary. But if you get a chance, go to your public library and get the documentary. Get the documentary Anita Hill, Speaking Truth to Power, because I really think that that documentary will help really solidify a lot of the things that were discussed in this particular class and this particular unit. And so Title VII is a part of the Civil Rights Act, the Jeanine Clery Act. Jeanine Clery, really quick, was murdered in her residence hall room in 1986. And after that happened, her parents did some investigating and found out that universities weren't required to let students, staff, and anyone know what kind of crimes were committed on that campus, as well as what were they doing to improve campus safety? What were they doing to try to prevent gender and sexual violence, like sexual assault, domestic or dating violence, and stalking? So if you get a chance, check that out. There's lots written on the Jeanine Clery Act of 1990, and then the Violence Against Women Act of 1994. And again, it was passed through Congress and signed by President Obama in 2013. So all of these large structural issues and laws are working together to prevent sexism, to prevent racism, to prevent heterosexism, because it's not just individual people, right, that are enacting these things. These are social structures. So I really like how Tufts University puts this out in a Venn diagram to show you how these laws and policies are trying to dismantle these larger systems of power. So again, One of the reasons why I created this little mini lecture was to prime you for the readings that you're going to have in the Barry Thorne piece, the Lorena Garcia piece, the Toomey piece, the Cindy Cruz piece, the Sokolowar piece, the Kronansky piece, because I wanted you to know, again, that education is a fundamental institution in the United States, and that we study sex and gender systems in education because they matter, because gender organizes and impacts all of the things that we do. And again, we have to use language to not only eliminate sexism, but dismantle patriarchy.